So now we're going to come to the next slide. And I actually think Jonathan and I, before we show you the slide, we're going to show you the real thing. I'll take this off just for a second to do that. So I don't think I can do this. Yeah, I brought it up. Okay, so you get the bottom, the part with all the baby mark on it. And then we're just going to keep going. Why don't you go across the front?
Good thinking.
And it's only the first 2/3 of the novel, and it actually has to go like this. We're just drape it over the piano. I will go to the slide. So yeah, this took probably like 3 days of my writing life, and then I did it down in New Orleans where I live part-time, where our house literally has 16-foot ceilings, and this was so long that when I hang it from the top of that ceiling, it drags on the floor, which is why it has stains from my daughter on it. She flings her food from her high chair onto her mother's work. And it hung on our kitchen wall for days and days, and I finally said to my husband, "Do you have anything to say about..." He said, "I thought it was something that Georgia Ray made." It's just like 18 months. Get out of here. Come on. Okay. This is the chart that I made when I was stuck in a book that's going to be published in August. Let's sort of play a guessing game here and get a little bit into more audience participation. And now I can't get this to go forward. What have I done wrong? Just lean on it? Oh wait, we're good. Okay. Get my card. I can figure it out. Okay, so you can see the full thing over there, and please feel free to come and inspect it as we wind up tonight. This is a book that is, by the way, I believe going to be called "And When She Was Good." I like to tell everyone this is a novel about an archetypal suburban woman, single mom, worried about her business, which she owns, thinking she's going to need a new act at middle life, has a very contentious and difficult relationship with the father of her child, and yes, she's an upscale madam who mainly services Maryland politicians. The suburban, single mom, every woman, and I'm actually pretty serious about that. I had written 2 short stories about this character, so you think I would know a lot about her, but in writing a novel about her, I decided I needed to know how she became who she was, and then how she stopped being who she was. And the first 30 chapters, so this actually represents more than 2/3 of the book, that I had to weave together her past and her present, and then throw her into the calamitous situation that would make it clear that she had no choice but to leave this life behind. So, really basic at first. 2 timelines, 2 colors. Is there any meaning to the colors red and blue? No, I just had a lot of construction paper that was red and blue. You can overthink this, definitely. But it's supposed to represent the two strands of her life that weave together to bring us to the present day, that bring us to the moment when everything must change. I'll avail myself of the actual thing.
I taped it.
Oh, you taped it. Right. It's okay. I just didn't want to wreck the piano. Y'all can expect this more fully after we talk. Her life begins with a perfect ordinarily triangle, because it's just how things are, the status quo, with this little tiny black blemish, which means in the very first chapter, the events that are going to overtake her life have already been referenced, except she doesn't know it. The blue represents her life as a teenager growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania with an abusive father who is going to do quite a bit to set her on the path that she ends up on. Down. Triangle pointing down. status quo, status quo, status quo. Oh wait, the blemish just got a little bit bigger. And although you can't see it probably from where you're sitting, I ragged the bottom. Things are beginning to fray. Down, down, sharply down. Now the bottom is fringed. Okay, now I can actually go to the chart because we're getting to where we are. And it just, here's a shape that indicates things are up and down. Here's someone's just taken a big chunk out of her life. This is all made up. And yet, as I created this color key for the work in progress, I generally began to figure out, and what was missing, by the way, was the blemish. That wasn't in the original chart. And I had to go back through and wind this problem that gets bigger and bigger and bigger and make sure that it just creeps up often enough. There's a little heart cut out in this chapter. I won't tell you what that's about. Here you see life being torn asunder. And by the time I finished doing this, I had solved the problem in my novel. It's just how I do stuff. But I've been doing it now pretty reliably since 2005. I think I've done something like this for all of my novels. It has helped me enormously, primarily because it gets you to stop. I worked at the Baltimore Sun for 12 years, as Jonathan noted in his introduction. Worked for a lot of different editors. The single best editor I worked for observed one time that people in the newspaper business don't put a lot of faith in sitting around and thinking. There's an inherent bias in favor of action. Novelists can actually fall prey to the same problem. We can beat up on ourselves too much to be writing. I have to be writing. If I'm not doing my, and people who know me via Facebook know that I do adhere to a daily word count for the most part, that I try to hit quotas. And that's not a bad discipline. There are no bad disciplines in writing. There's no one way, as I've said repeatedly since we started this talk. But sometimes you just need to take a break. It doesn't mean you're giving up. It doesn't mean that you've stopped working. But you have to step back. You have to gain perspective. Novels range, on average, I think, from about 70,000 words to maybe, SJ, was your longest ever like 120? Yeah. It's a lot. Like if you took the pieces of paper themselves and tried to spread them out across the floor of your home, you would very quickly run out of room. And you would still just have pieces of white paper with black stuff on it. The stuff that's driving you crazy. And all I wanted to do, and I just did it for myself, but now I talk about it because I feel it's really helped. But, now here's the important part, and this is the part where we circle back to the idea, I'm not telling anyone to do it this way. But my hunch is that everyone in this room, as a creative person, might have a way of working. For example, if I knew how to write music, if I understood music theory to the extent that my stepson does, I might try to create melodies for, like if I could say this chapter is an E flat, I might actually try to put notes on musical sheets and say this is what my song looks like. I can't do that. I mean, this is, I can, I can cut construction paper. And I kind of like doing it, actually. I mean, I do find it extremely relaxing. It's almost something I now look forward to because I know when I do it, I'm going to solve a problem that I can't otherwise solve. And, as far as I'm concerned, it hasn't let me down yet. I haven't gone into this process and been like, okay, well, that was an enormous waste of time. Because the whole time you're doing this, you're still thinking about the work, but you're giving yourself a break from sort of that relentless momentum forward to do the work. It's important to write. Sometimes it's important not to write. Sometimes it's important to know that you need to step away, and that's not what I call writer's block, but it's just, if you don't ever park your brain, you're never going to have sort of those serendipitous discoveries, which I believe can happen to the outliner and the non-outliner alike. And so I present this to you. I've never given this talk before. I've hinted at it before. People have suggested medication. But this is the first time, and it now brought us to the point where you get to ask questions, and you don't have to ask me questions about this. You can ask me questions about anything, but this has taken me through, as I said, every novel since 2004, I can't even, it's like I've written 8 novels this way at least, and never regretted it. And I honestly think, again, I don't want everyone to run out to Dwayne Reed tonight and buy construction paper and colored pens and colored index cards, but I think it would be great if people began thinking about what sort of non-text-based process could help me break out of the bog. And if you never get bogged down, bless you, and I hate you a little bit. Thank you very much. Jonathan.
Do you find that that each novel sort of sets you on a new visual course with new symbols that come to you? I mean, you start and it's an intuitive kind of symbolic visual guide that you created different?
I challenged myself never to write the same novel twice. Mm-hmm. It was interesting to work on this book because this book, as with I'd Know You Anywhere, involves a man in prison. And whereas in I'd Know You Anywhere, the whole suspense of the book is she ever going to go talk to him in prison. This character is regularly talking to her ex-pimp who doesn't know that she put him in prison. So it's a very different kind of suspense. And he also doesn't know he's the father of her child. There's a lot he doesn't know, and he never finds out she's at great risk. So because I'm trying to write a different kind of book every time, I tell myself that it should be different every time, that I should never make the same art project twice. So I don't let myself do it the same way twice. And I kind of, that's the challenge I give myself. Well, even if I've, like this, I loved doing this, but if I can't see that it should be a radically different version, I think I would actually begin to doubt. I would think I was like, well, you're writing a book that you've written before. And then I would be dubious about myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All the way in the back in the blue, I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see them. Yes?
I thought the talk was great, but I have a question not about it.
Okay, that's fine.
Can you talk about having a full-time job, sort of writing, and then writing as a full-time job, and whether there was a difference in your novel writing when you worked full-time as a writer, and that topic?
Yeah, it's something I really like to talk about because I know that most people have day jobs, and it's tough. When I worked full-time at the Baltimore Sun, I sold my first book, and now the pressure was on to write a book a year, if possible. And I did not have kids at the time, and that's a lot extra. And what can I say about it? To deny that would be foolish, but I did sort of a ruthless inventory of my day. And the first thing I figured out was I'm a morning person. That was actually the good news. And I thought about the adage that you should pay yourself first when you're trying to save money. So it's like, I'm going to pay myself first with time. I'm going to get up every day at 6, which was really not a struggle for me. I'm basically a person who wakes up at first light. I'm going to work for 2 hours. And that means by the time I get to work, anything can happen, and I can work a 12-hour day, a 14-hour day, and they can't take my personal writing day away from me. And I did that pretty much for, as I said, 7 years. Really, I would say 6, because I wrote the first book in more of a fractured, like, I don't know if I'm ever going to sell this. It didn't feel real. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was really hard. When I stopped doing it, when I left my full-time job, which was a little over 10 years ago, I felt like I'd had an anvil on my foot for 6 years. I was like, wow, this surprisingly is so much nicer. They took the anvil off my foot. That and what, it actually kind of scares me because, I don't, have any arrogance about, for some reason, I mean, I could need a day job any day. You know, for now I don't, for now things are great, but who knows? And first I don't know who would hire me at this point in my life. So my old industry is basically gone. But secondly, I don't know if I could ever do that again. Like it's sort of like I look back and I think that was hard. And I don't want to do that again. But at the time, I didn't know a way to get what I wanted without doing that. So I was ruthless about taking those first 2 hours a day. I worked weekends. I basically didn't take a vacation for 6 years. And that's not the healthiest thing to do, but I was hopeful that I was doing that for the short term and that I would be able to quit my day job. The writer Ron Carlson gives a really wonderful talk about writing. And what he says, and I think it's a great talk because it is a talk about that's mindful of the fact that we all have lives, we have families, we have jobs. It's, you know, we're not, very few of us have the privilege of just creating in a very pure way without worries about money and life. And he said if you have as little as 10 minutes a day, you can write. But in order to do that, you've got to shut everything down. It's like you know, the computer, the internet is off, the phone is off, your family gets it. You have to carve out that time for yourself, and you have to approach your work as like the wild, savage, barefoot boy, and just let loose. And if it's 10 minutes a day, if it's an hour a day, that's great, and focus on that. It's really hard, and I think it's especially hard for women to say to their families, to say to spouses, to say to partners, I need this. I know female writers who have paid a price. By the way, I'm not married to the person I was married to when I wrote those first books. That tells you anything, you know. And that's ended right around book 6, I believe it was. So it tells you something about my situation. It really just becomes sort of like a time study. Where can I find the time? Will I grant myself this time? And I think that's the toughest part, is to say to yourself, I deserve this time. It's mine. I get it. And it's a selfish time. Fine. You've got to be selfish to write a little bit. You've got to be selfish while you're writing. I mean, you know, however, you know, you've got to go hide in your cave to do it. I hope that's, I mean, it's honest. I don't know if it's helpful, but I know it's honest.
Thank you.
You, sir.
Yeah, on the visual outlining, because at the end you said you're now starting to look forward to it. Is it true now that you are actually truly bogged down when you do this, or?
Yeah, I wouldn't do it if I weren't bogged down. If I could keep sailing forward, I would never stop. I'm really stuck when I do it. And I tell you, it scared me. The charts, the orange and the green and the yellow for I'd Know You Anywhere, it scared me how early I had to go to it. I had never been that, I mean, that, like I said, I don't think I'm 40% of the way through that book, and that's really early. And I was pretty unnerved. This is a book where I talked about how I always know my endings. I absolutely knew how this book ended. I had no idea how to get there. And that was sort of the thing I kept revisiting. And that's often, for me, that often is a sort of like, okay, there's the destination. It's like the bridge is washed out. I don't get it. And that usually, it's usually the bridge is washed out. I have no idea how to get where I'm going. And that's the moment where I do it. But no, if I didn't have to, no, I wouldn't do it. Heck no, I mean, I'd cook something. To hear first, yeah.
Have you ever found when you're doing this visual outline that when you're stuck and you're going through and you find something at the top and you go, oh, this is a really big mistake, and it changes the whole course of your writing?
I wish I could remember a specific time because I know that to be true. I think generally what you find doing this is where you've been heavy-handed with foreshadowing, since I work in suspense crime novels, and you're always trying to sort of give those little, sort of drop those little, like Easter eggs in a DVD for the really careful reader. And I write for the most careful reader. When I sit down to write, it's like, okay, let me write for my friend who usually figures out everything in my books on page 5. And it's sort of twofold. I try to then be as sophisticated as possible to make the book more of a puzzle for that reader, but then also to like, someone's going to figure it out. What are the stakes if they do? Like, just, to think about character, and will they stay, they figured out the story, but will they stay because they're so interested in what happens when the character figures out the story? But yes, absolutely, I have found mistakes. I have found things that were I tend to find things that are heavy-handed and then things that are underutilized. There's something that happens in the first chapter and it's so glancing, and I realized, if I was really thinking about it, that it keeps coming back, and it's that black blemish. And there are even some places where it's kind of sublimated. And I know that one of the characters is thinking about it, even if there's nothing on the page to tell me that. But yeah, absolutely, I will find stuff that's been overdone, get it out, throw it out. I mean, this also, when you reduce your words to like little pieces of construction paper, it's so much easier to toss them. When you've written 5,000 words and it's a really great chapter and it's a really scene, dragging that, like trying to do the drag to the trash on your computer, you can't do it. It's like, oh, it's 5,000 words. It took me 3 days. I worked on it all week. Like red triangle, phew, go, bye, gone, don't need it. I mean, that's, that entire chapter got cut of, and if you're a writer, you're like, I don't want to cut out an entire chapter. That was a really good chapter about a quotidian day on death row. I did a lot of research on that chapter. I thought it was really interesting. It was really smart, but it's just an orange rectangle. Colin? Yes, there.
Hi. If these represent like metaphorically scenes, and so you're understanding either the character or the plot line by looking at these, how do you decide where to drop in the beginning? Like how to construct your lead, or how do you do your first chapter, your first scene? How do you decide what's first?
How do I decide what's... Well, I am a big proponent of, how do they say it? Starting in the middle. It's like, start the scene late and leave early. I'm a big believer in that. I actually just... I was just editing something today, something really small that I wrote. I was asked to write a very brief memoir of my time at the Baltimore Sun. And I lopped off the first 2 paragraphs. I once worked for a really, really pompous book editor, and he had this handout that he gave to his reviewers called the Jewel Polishing Kit. And it was very, very pompous. And his advice on that was, once you had finished your book review for him, to read your first line, read it again, glory in all of its brilliance, now get rid of it. This is a shockingly effective thing to do. You can actually even apply this to some pretty well-known novels. And what I've come to understand from this is that we all tend to do kind of a little throat clearing at the beginning of our novel. It's almost like a little tap dance, like, is this on? Is this on? Hey, do I have everyone's attention? I'm going to do something really clever. I'm really smart. I'm really like, this is really cool. Story begins. And that most of us can usually chop away. How do I know where the story begins?
Or where to drop into it. You may know chronologically where it starts, but...
That I think I'm governed a lot by instinct, and also by a long-time career in journalism. 20 years in journalism, you spend a lot of time thinking about your leads. And so that's something I don't sweat about. I really sweat about my last lines a lot more, because I come out of, again, 20 years of journalism. You could slave over the last line of your story, and then some guy on the composing room would slice it out with a razor because it turned out to be just a little bit too long. So you're like, ah! That, I think, comes more from reading. I think the more you read, the more you just develop a really good sense of beginnings. And you think about the beginnings that you love. One of my favorite beginnings of all time is 100 Years of Solitude. Because I just think it's hilarious that you start with this amazing, vivid scene of, when Aureliano Buendia was to face the firing squad, he remembered the day his father took him into the jungle to see ice. And that's nowhere close to the beautiful words that are written. And then it's like, 300 pages later, you finally get to that scene, and you just, you're in, you're hooked. As a reader, I look for a first line that is suffused with the confidence of a storyteller. Like, I know where I'm going. It's like a really good tour guide. come on, keep up, trust me, this is going to be great. And there's a snap to it, and there's just a confidence to it, and that's what I look for in my own openings. And I always misquote this actually, which is funny because Stephen Sondheim is like, one of my gods, and I always say that he wrote a lyric that was, where does anything begin? He didn't really write that lyric, but I think about that all the time. Where does anything begin? And I think about the beginnings that I love.